as in many of the Hindu and Buddhist teachings, non-dual realization means the actual experience of ourselves, the uncovering of ourselves as a very subtle, unified dimension of consciousness, very subtle ground of consciousness. So the realization process is a series of practices for helping us do that, for facilitating that attunement to this ground of our being. It's not the realization itself, because this ground, which I call fundamental consciousness, is self-arising. It's not something that we construct or attune to or make happen. But we need to do, as I'll talk a little bit later why, we need to do this kind of deep, subtle attunement to ourselves in order for it to arise. We experience this ground of our being, fundamental consciousness, as a very fine, pervasive, spacious expanse of consciousness. And when I say pervasive, I mean that we actually experience it pervading the objects of our perception. So I look at the table, and the table is both solid and at the same time appears permeable, right? As if it were actually made of this spacious element, this fundamental consciousness. And very importantly, at the same time as the environment is experienced as pervaded by consciousness and made of this very fine, luminous, unified consciousness, our own body, our own being is also experienced that way. We know ourselves as made of consciousness, and we know ourselves as being that consciousness, not something separate from ourselves, but who we actually are. So we experience our own body as permeable, completely open all the way through, as well as solid, and made of consciousness. Now this experience of pervasive consciousness, which is not very difficult to attune to, it could take a little while to stabilize there, to be there all the time, but it's not as difficult as some of the traditional teachings from many, many years ago presented. We can open to it. And when we do, it has tremendous relevance for personal healing, for healing from trauma. So many reasons. Oh, let me say too that the write-up in the program is from an 8-hour webinar that I did last year. There's no way I can cover all that in half an hour, but I'm gonna go as far as I can, okay? So this experience of ourselves, of our own nature, as pervasive fundamental consciousness, is tremendously helpful for facilitating the healing of our traumatic past, of our reaction to the traumas in our early life. First of all, because it pervades out there and in here at the same time, it means that our experience of life is both exterior and internal at the same time, that's a unified internal and external experience. When we've had a lot of trauma in our life, or even a little bit of trauma in our life, we generally grow up either focused in an imbalanced way towards the environment. Hypervigilance, we call that, right? We're looking out for the dangers, right? The dangers that we remember all too well. So we're focused on the outside rather than experience ourselves as present within ourselves. Also, if we've had a lot of trauma, we may have particularly decided not to be present within our body because that makes us feel too conspicuous as the possible object of abuse, right? So we grow up very focused out there. Or we may grow up shutting out our experience of the outer world and just withdrawing deep inside our own being, right? Either way, whether we shut out the outside or we shut off the inside, we constrict our experience of both outer and inner life, right? Now you can probably see the implication of this for our intimate relationships, or all our relationships, because if we're outer focused in that way, we tend to lose ourselves in relationships. This is a common thing for sensitive people altogether, right? So we lose track of our own needs, even our own desires, who we're actually attracted to, what we want in a relationship, and everything is out given to the other person. Or we protect ourselves from any sort of intimacy and close off to intimacy and just shut away into our own being, right? So when we actually know ourselves as this pervasive space, inner and outer as a unity, we can remain in contact with our own being at the same time as we experience actual oneness. I mean, actual oneness, that we're made of the same stuff with another human being, or with anything, even with the table, right? Another important point for healing from trauma is that when we experience ourselves as pervaded by fundamental consciousness, as made of fundamental consciousness, it means that we're deeply in contact with ourselves everywhere in our body, right? So because we are fundamental consciousness, again, it's not something separate from ourselves. To be pervaded by this aspect of ourselves mean that we are everywhere present within our body. And a very interesting thing is that when we are in touch, in contact with the internal space of our body, we're in contact with our own being. It's, we don't just feel, lungs and, liver and so forth. No, we get to a level of beingness that is quality-rich beingness, love, right? So to live in our own chest means that we're deeply within the quality of love within ourselves. Our heart opens, right? In ordinary parlance, our heart opens, right? We're deeply in touch with the internal space of our head. We're deeply in touch with our intelligence. Deeply in touch with a sense of power, of being adequate and powerful in the world, right? Deeply in touch with our sense of sexuality, who we are. So, the foundation of ourselves, very, very important for healing from trauma, that we awaken these qualities, because it's these qualities that we constricted in reaction to trauma. And I want to talk about that more fully in a moment, but I want you to first have a little bit of experience of what it means to inhabit the body, in case that's a shift for you. So take a moment, just as the write-up said I was going to teach all the practices. Of course I'm not, but I'll teach this little tiny one. Rest your hands on your lap. And now take a moment to become aware of your hands. In becoming aware of your hands, you may notice how hot or cold they are. You may notice how tense or how relaxed they are. And that's being aware of your hands, right? Now enter into your hands. This is the shift that we make, right? See if you can feel that you're actually living within your hands. Yes, and you may even feel, if you're sensitive to yourself in that way, that just by being in your hands, you enter into your whole body. Now, everywhere that we live in ourselves, we are open and responsive to the environment. So, having just experienced that, living within your hands, here's just one more very short experiential attunement. Come and feel that you're living in your chest, right? That you inhabit, the whole area of your chest, all the way through to the back of yourself, out to the sides. That you can live there and experience yourself living inside your chest. As you do that, you may notice that you can now experience the present moment inside your chest and outside your chest at the same time. So, internal contact with ourselves is at the same time openness to our environment. That means that we become freer, we become more fluid in all of our responsiveness to our environment as we realize ourselves as fundamental consciousness. Our emotional responses become more fluid, deeper. So this is not in any way a zombie-like experience to realize ourselves as non-duality. our emotions become more fluid, deeper. We go past, we can release some of those old held emotions so that we don't react with that extra wallop of our childhood pain, but our emotional response to life is fluid. Our cognition is fluid. Our thoughts are fluid. We might even get past the usual tape loops to some actual creativity in our thinking, right? Our experience of pleasure becomes fluid, right? So it's a matter of freedom. As we realize ourselves as fundamental consciousness, and we know ourselves as the stillness, because fundamental consciousness is experienced as stillness, as a ground. It's even deeper than our energetic level, because energy moves. This is experienced as stillness. When we know ourselves as that stillness, all of the movement of life flows more fluidly, right? It's also called non-grasping, right? Instead of clamping down on our experience, we can allow it to move because we have the ground of our being, which has actually never been injured. Here's another important aspect for healing from trauma. When we uncover this ground of our being, we realize it feels like it's always been there. The traditional spiritual literature refers to it as uncreated. It's not part of our making of the world, not part of our interpretive learned template of the world. This is something that just arises. It's part of our nature, right? So we don't create it. It feels actual. It feels like we have finally gotten to who we really are, and then our responses can move through that stillness without disturbing it, and we have a sense that even whatever we've been through in our childhood, we've never been fundamentally injured. For those of you who work with people who have been heavily, severely traumatized, we've all had people come into work with us, or maybe we ourselves have felt that we were damaged beyond repair, we're irreparably damaged. And that just is not the case, and it's something we can really feel when we get to this ground level of our being. Inhabiting the body as a whole, we uncover the qualities of our being, our intelligence, our love, our power, our sexual pleasure, and we can experience all of those aspects of ourselves at the same time. It means we can think and feel at the same time. We can speak with our whole being, right? As I said on that panel Friday, we come to a sense of being able to touch with our whole being, right? We meet each other as a whole being. So wholeness, very, very important part of what we're calling the unbound body. Wholeness, authenticity, and that quality-rich sense of our own aliveness. Now, trauma, generally in the psychotherapy field now, we've loosened the definition of trauma to include pretty much anything that, as a young child in particular, we were unable to absorb as a whole. We were unable to digest, right? We had to limit the impact of that experience. And we can only limit the impact of experience by tightening our body. Here's another thing that I still find very interesting. So we constrict ourselves in reaction to trauma by dampening the impact, for example, of an angry voice or the sight of parents fighting, right? We actually constrict the instrument of our experience, which is our body. There's no other way that we can limit the intake of experience. We also limit our expression of ourselves in any way that we think might not be met with approval and love, right? And here again, we cannot curb our own expression of ourselves without constricting the body, right? If you go to conjure a little bit of sadness in yourself, and then you try not to feel it, you'll see that you're using, it's probably the fascia, deep tissues within the body to suppress that. So we all grow up, even those of us with fairly normal, we'll say trauma-free, right, experiences of childhood, we all grow up to have had some experience with having to either suppress ourselves or keep life out, dampen the impact of experience. We also constrict ourselves to match how our parents live in their body, right? So if our whole family is up here, right, at the top of the forehead, right, and we're all very intelligent, we're thinking people, but feelings are a little bit messy. We don't like the feelings so much. We live up here. The child will automatically match that, just to be part of the family, right? Not that there's any calculated purpose to it, but in order to be in contact, we will match wherever the parents live in themselves, right? And organize ourselves accordingly. We also organize ourselves, constrict ourselves in response to commands like, don't be so smart, right? Or don't be so loud, or try to sit still. Of course, if we just constrict ourselves a couple of times, that's not going to have any lasting impact on ourselves. But if we constrict ourselves over time, repetitively, if we're constantly told, can you lower your voice? What you're saying doesn't make sense. Just be quiet. You can, we'll listen to you, when you're grown up. If we're constantly getting messages like that, and we repetitively clamp down on our voice, the tissues, the fascia, actually glues together and becomes a chronic holding pattern. Generally not severe enough for us even to notice, right? I mean, we can still talk, but the freedom of our voice, the freedom of our self-expression, the freedom of our love, when we begin to unravel those holding patterns, is remarkable. And it helps us not only to heal and gain more access to ourselves, more access to our love, to our intelligence, to our sense of being at least equal weight, equal vitality to the other people we meet, but it also helps us open more thoroughly to fundamental consciousness. So once we start to get on the path, and we really want to know this very fundamental level of our being, and of all being, then it becomes quite important that we unwind these holding patterns. So I know the write-up says I'm going to demonstrate that. I'm not. I have no, this is not a good format for processing the material that comes up from that kind of unraveling. But we can use, I'll just say in the realization process, we do use this very subtle attunement to ourselves that we gain by realizing ourselves as fundamental consciousness. We use that subtle attunement to focus within these held patterns, these glued tissues of ourselves, and help them unwind. And as they unwind, we gain more and more access to ourselves. Any questions on this? Yes? I know. I'm breaking with the usual timing. Yeah. I think I can hear you if you just speak up. Just speak up. What is your question? Oh, it won't be on the tape. I see. I'll repeat it. I'll repeat this question.
Yeah. My question, you said that the repetitive sort of constriction
Yes.
is this gluing
Yeah.
deep tissues, I guess.
Yeah, the fascia probably. Yeah.
I'm curious if you could speak to how that happens in a single, I guess, traumatic event. Is there an extreme gluing of large ones, or
Yes.
is it more extreme or less? Just could you speak to that?
Thank you. That's a very good question. Yeah, so to repeat for the tape, he's asking if this kind of gluing together can happen in a single severe trauma, because really what I've been talking about are repetitive traumas and rather ordinary traumas. But yes, in a severe trauma, we can. If, for example, we're hit hard, right, by either by a person or in a car accident or something, we will take in the shape of that impact and grip onto it, and the tissues will may retain that impact, right? If it's worked with right away, then maybe not, right? But if not, then the tissues will retain the impact, right? I've worked, unfortunately, with many people who have been beaten or hit, that kind of abuse, and they have retained the impact, not only the fear and the grief and the anger of that experience, but also the shape of the impact needs to be released. Yeah. Yes.
If we as parents don't deal with our trauma, how might we unwittingly pass it down to our children?
Yes. He's asking if we as parents, do you want to repeat that for the tape?
Sure. If we as parents don't deal with our trauma, how might we unwittingly pass that down to our children?
Yes. I think the most important thing is not to worry overly about it. You know, I mean, this is, by the way, is not pathology. I'm not talking about pathology. This is the normal human condition, right? And most of us can live perfectly normal lives with a little bit of organization of ourselves, right? So if you're providing a loving environment, which I have a feeling you are.
We actually do deal with our trauma. I'm talking about, we're both therapists and we know people who might not prefer to deal with it.
If
There might be some side effects.
if our parents haven't dealt with their trauma, then of course they will strike out. You know, they'll pass their pain down in any number of ways. They'll strike out in anger at the child for behaving in a way for which they were punished, right? I mean, there's myriad ways that people who haven't worked with themselves at all pass down trauma. And the holding pattern, as I said, the holding pattern in the body is actually mirrored, right? And so there's a kind of generational passing down of pain in that way. Even with the feelings in the body are passed down like that, the holding of fear. So we get a kind of social passing down of pain too, the traumas that peoples have sustained, passed down in that way. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, Vanessa. Okay, good. And then Vanessa.
Okay. I'm familiar with the realization process and I really enjoy it. But when conditioned patterns come up in daily life, you can't always sit down and do the whole process. I'm wondering if you recommend anything that can be done quickly when the conditioned patterns show up.
Some of the practices can be done quite quickly. You do need to be familiar with them, right? And once you've done a certain amount of practice and you finally stabilize there as fundamental consciousness, we find that we can allow vibration and various abrasive stimuli to move through this ground of our being, that we don't have to hold on to it. It moves through us, so we become much more tolerant of abrasive situations and much more able then to respond fully to painful encounters. Yeah. But the core breath, can always be. I'll do that if I have a moment. Yes, I'll do a little bit of the core work before we stop today. Yes, Vanessa.
Fast. Thank you, Judith.
Yes.
Since doing your work, I feel real. I feel whole. And I had quite a long-term pattern of hypervigilance on the outside, like you mentioned.
Yes.
One thing that I'm noticing is I also got sick, quite sick, and I feel like I'm noticing a pattern of internal hypervigilance. the constant scanning. And I wonder if there's anything you could say
Self-consciousness,
about that.
yeah?
Like my stomach hurts. Does this hurt? Is this okay?
Uh-huh.
Is this okay? Is this okay? The same
Right.
way as I used to scan
Uh-huh.
outside for signs of safety.
Yes.
It's almost like I've taken that same energy and turned it inside. And I wonder if you have anything you could share about that.
I mean, there's many ways to approach that, of course, but you can cultivate that sense of being all right through that first exercise that we do of inhabiting the body, so that you feel that you're in your feet and you take a moment to really accept yourself just as you are, right? And then you feel you're in your legs. You take a moment to actually experience yourself and accept yourself within your legs, so on through the whole body. I don't know if you've internalized a very worried parent or something of that sort, and then there's also working with that, right? So a sense of safety, and yeah, yes, yeah, okay, yes, one more.
Hi, I'm a therapist too, and I'm new to the realization process.
Yes.
I do work with Dick Schwartz's work on self-energy, some of these, and mindfulness. What you did with us today, I'm wondering, is that sort of the beginning for clients to find that realness inside? Is it primarily through an embodiment?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The practices of the realization process begin with being in the body. And they start actually with the feet and go all the way through the body and attuning to the essential qualities that we can uncover there, and then finding the space outside and feeling that the space inside and outside is the same. It takes about half an hour. It's quite important to start with embodiment, I have found, because even though this is our actual nature, that's how it feels and that's how it's taught, that this is who we really are, our true nature. Sometimes it's taught that since this is our true nature, we can just let go and relax into it. And most people who just let go will let go from the surface of themselves, right? So you get this kind of spacey, it's better than being real tight, of course. Well, they just let go from the surface of themselves, and they have not reached that very fine, pervasive consciousness at all. So in order to get to that very fine consciousness, we need to let go from within the entire internal depth of our body, right? And then we find that we do let go into this pervasive space. So yes, so the exercises begin with being in the body, and if someone is very diffuse, right, has not what we call in the psychotherapy field ego strength, has not cohesive insight, then we just do the embodiment work and not the pervasive space yet, and then we proceed to the pervasive space. Yeah. Okay, since we've gotten onto that, let me do a little bit of the core work. So that practice that I just very briefly described is one of the main practices of the realization process. And the other practice is attuning to core points within the body. And I'm just going to do a little bit of it because, again, I only have a couple of minutes. But sitting here, let's start by feeling that you're in your feet. See if you can really make contact with yourself, just the way you felt yourself enter into your hands. See if you can enter into your feet. And now take a moment to feel that you're in your whole body. And now find your heart chakra, right? Your heart center, it's in the center of your chest, but deep in the core of your body. Right? So we're going into that very subtle channel that we can experience running vertically through the torso, neck, and head. And we're going in through the heart center of the chest, deep in the core of the body. See if you can initiate a little bit of breath within the heart center, as if you had air there. It's going to be a tiny breath. It can be a long breath, but it's coming through that tiny little aperture. And in doing that, you may feel a very subtle vibration, subtle resonance through the whole core of your body, right? Through that whole subtle channel that runs through the torso, neck, and head, just by breathing within the heart chakra. Right? That the breath starts there. Now, just to experience this wholeness and how this core of ourself, we're only going to do this one point today because that's all we have time for today, but just to see how this enters us into our wholeness, staying in your heart chakra, and without moving from there at all, find the other heart chakras in the room. See if you can. Staying right where you are in your heart chakra. Yes, find the other heart chakras in the room. So this core of ourself actually opens into that fundamental consciousness, into that oneness of ourself and everything else and everyone else. Okay, now come open your eyes. Good. Okay. That's all we have time for today. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.